Hello, everyone. Welcome along. We'll get started about 5 past at the latest, so you've got time to get a coffee. Mm. Going to be very rude and mute the people who are not unmuted, but yeah, unless you're talking, if you can keep yourself on mute, that'd be useful. Just because we're going to record today.
I'm coming out of a meeting for this, okay? And I can't do that all the time.
Someone's going to say something terrible on one of these things one day. I'll take no responsibility for it. So we'll start about 5 past. While we're waiting, if everyone wants to pop in the chat box which organisation you work for and where you are in the country, that'd be lovely. Be good to get a sense of who's in the room. Paula's on the move. Excellent. Right, she's got a seat now. That's good. Still a few people coming from the waiting room, so we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Got a food bank from Australia. That's quite far. That's cool. Dad's Rock. Excellent. Ponies Help Children. What a charity. Playlist for Life. Also an excellent organisation. I'm not going to like judge people's organisations, but you're all excellent. Susan, I have not seen you for ages. Hello. Pamela's in Dumfries. I'm running a workshop next Friday in Dumfries, Pamela, if you want to come along. If you go on the Third Sector Interface website for Dumfries and Galloway, you can sign up. It's free. Hey, Neighbourhood Networks. Cool. What a lovely bunch. Right, we've got a few more people coming in. We're at 37 participants so far. We will still finish at half 11, don't worry. I do build in starting a wee bit later. Right, what I'm going to put in, first link I'm going to put in, I'll pop in a link to my LinkedIn. If there's anything, any questions, Obviously, we'll have a chance for Q&A throughout today. Pop questions in the chat box as we go. You don't need to wait till the end to ask questions. If there's anything after the workshop, do please reach out on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to answer anything. I'll put my details there. Obviously, we need to be connected. If you want to send me a connection request, that's fine. I'm sure I'm connected to quite a few already. So yeah, if there's anything after the workshop that you want to ask, then feel free. That's absolutely fine. But as I said, just keep the questions coming in the chat box, and we'll pick stuff up as we go. The other thing I will do is I'll grab the slides link once we're ready to start, and I'll pop that in as well because we're still waiting on a few people coming in. So you can open up the slides. It's Google Docs link in the Zoom chat. It means you can have them open at your own end. So it means you don't need to rely on me screen sharing. You can kind of go back and forward and kind of look at them in your own time and refer back to them. You can see lots of you have jumped into the slides already, so that is good. Cool. Right. I think we'll get started. So, uh, welcome along, everyone, to this session on a Monday morning using LinkedIn as a leadership tool and hopefully reframing it from not being a comms and marketing channel to being a leadership channel. And that's what we're going to try and cover today. I will dip in and out of slides as we go. We'll have a chance for you all to chat with each other and get a sense of maybe what you're hoping to get out of today, maybe what you've been struggling about with LinkedIn. And equally, there'll be lots of exciting things that people in this room have done with LinkedIn that you want to share with other people as well. So use the chat box as you see fit. If there's examples you want to give or resources you want to share, or questions you want to ask, you can use the chat box on Zoom for any of that stuff, and we'll pick stuff up and refer to it as we go. So what I'm going to do, I'll share a screen just now. We'll jump into slides and we'll get cracking. Okay, okay. Hopefully everyone can see that. Can I get a thumbs up from someone just to make sure we can? Hey, right, okay, okay, cool. So I'm Ross McCulloch with a Third Sector Lab. So we run these training workshops for free as part of work that we deliver with a range of funders. So we work with people like the Robertson Trust, RS McDonald, Health and Social Care Alliance, National Lottery Community Fund for Scotland, and that keeps these sessions free for anyone that is in this room. If you have a funder that you think might also benefit for some of this, or if you are a funder in the room or a membership body, do please drop me a message on LinkedIn. I'd love to chat to think about how we can support either your members or your grant holders through training. And the aim through the curve is to try and keep all of this training free at the point of delivery for the organisations who need it, like yourselves. Broader work that we do, so you've probably seen, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see that I talk a lot about trying to get people from the tech sector onto charity boards. We have a programme called Digital Trustees. I'm going to touch a wee bit on the Open Working programme today and the kind of concepts around open working and why that's important when we're thinking about how we approach LinkedIn. And then in a broader sense, we deliver one-to-one training. So if you're interested in training like this for your team or your senior leadership team, we can deliver training like this in-house for your organisation. And we also do lots of work on building websites and digital transformation work with organisations as well. For those of you in the room who are leaders of Scottish charities or third sector organisations, I'd urge you to go and look at SCVO's Digital Leadership Programme, which is just about to start recruiting again. So if you Google SCVO Digital Leadership Programme, you'll find it. But that's just about to open up that new cohort, specifically for third sector organisations based in Scotland. Although I have a Scottish accent and we are based in Glasgow, we do work UK wide and a wee bit of work globally as well. So you'll notice in the room that there's people not just from Scotland in this room today. So, part one, we're going to talk about framing the shift. This is probably the most important thing. And I think for those of you who maybe are lucky enough to have a comms team or a marketing team, what I'd like you to think about when we're thinking about leadership and we're thinking about LinkedIn is we are not framing this as a comms and a marketing exercise. We are framing this as part and parcel of how you operate as leaders. So the same way that you might go and have a meeting with government or try and convince a funder to give you money or answer that really critical email today or have a meeting with your board to decide where you're going to go next, LinkedIn is part and parcel of that work. This is not a shameless marketing and comms strategy, and this is not about suddenly becoming a content expert. And don't worry too much about this concept of personal brand. I think it can be quite unhelpful. For those of you who are UK-based organisations, that can also be quite difficult conceptually in the sense of the kind of cringe factor that comes with that. So we'll talk a wee bit about that. The biggest thing that I would say is there is no right and wrong way to do LinkedIn. And this is another chat that people feel that they kind of fall into, where people feel that to do LinkedIn, I need to look like that guy or I need to write like that person. And actually, what I'd like to think about today is there's lots and lots of different leaders in the third sector, in the UK and globally, who do it in very different ways. And we're going to look at those different examples. Find the thing that feels right for you. Do not try and be like a leader that you are not like. So let's think about framing that as we go through today. So, reiterating, LinkedIn is not a comms channel, it's infrastructure for leader. I really like this. This is from Nicola Welsh, who's the chief exec of Held in Her Hearts, who are a bereavement charity. She does amazing work. She's been part of our open working program. One of the things she spoke about a couple of weeks ago in the program was this notion of climbing Cringe Mountain. And I think for a lot of people in this room, this will probably resonate that a lot of the type of stuff you might want to write about on LinkedIn, or maybe the stuff that you see hitting your feeds, can feel a bit cringe and it maybe does not align with your leadership style. And this has been a big thing for Nicola, is thinking about how do I talk about the things that are important to my work, that are authentic to me as a leader, but actually getting over some of that stuff around this feeling a wee bit cringe. And actually, it can feel like this is all about ego. And actually, for me, leadership visibility is not ego. Now, intertwined with that are all the kind of things that are probably, part of the reason that you turned up here today. I don't have time to do this stuff. I don't want to self-promote. I've got a comms team that handles all this. What if I say the wrong thing? And this is some of the stuff that we're going to pick up today. And hopefully, when it comes to the part of today's session where we get you in pairs and thinking about the kind of stuff that you'll talk about, and sharing some ideas and challenging each other, this is the kind of things that I would like you to think about. Do you have time to answer all your emails today? Do you have time to go to that 2 hour meeting where it's not clear what the outcome is of it? I would like you to treat LinkedIn the same way you treat all those other bits of your work, is to sense check it, not just go in with a kind of happy clappy approach, but how am I best spending time in the week and how is this resulting in something? So has LinkedIn allowed me to get 2 meetings with budget holders in local authorities? Has LinkedIn helped key corporate partners understand some of the work that we're doing with their money? Has LinkedIn helped raise the profile of our organisation so that when journalists come to speak to people about the thing that we're working on, they always think about us? Has it helped us connect with more politicians at local and national level? So we're thinking about how we align organisational strategy with what we're doing on LinkedIn. This is not something that exists in a vacuum, and this is where it can be unhelpful to think about this purely as a comms and a marketing exercise. If it can't help you achieve things that you're trying to achieve as a leader, don't do it or pare back. So we're not talking about becoming content creators and creating stuff all the time. For some of you, one post a week might be plenty. So just thinking about that rhythm that you're going to get into. Um, and I would say as we're going through this, there'll be lots of examples of other leaders, is go and follow some of these people, try and find a role model, try and look at what other people are doing and how you're going to emulate some of that stuff yourself. Okay, okay. So, um, we've kind of touched on this already, but what are people trying to do? And it might be quite nice as well if you want to pop in the chat box, like what is that big thing that you're trying to get out of LinkedIn? Is it about strategic partnerships? Are you trying to advance the organization's mission beyond those transactional interactions? Are you trying to open up your connections to spheres that you're not naturally aligned with? So maybe corporate partnerships are a fairly new thing for you. Maybe there's funders out with the area that you traditionally geographically work in, and you want to open up opportunities with funders that you don't have relationships with at the moment. The big thing that I would say with LinkedIn, and probably one of the biggest traps that most organizations and leaders fall into, is people connect with people. So when we're thinking about connecting with a funder, we're not connecting with a funder, we're connecting with the chief exec of that funder, we're connecting with the grants officer who might be making decisions about our application. So we're connecting with people, we are not connecting with faceless entities. And this is where a lot of third sector organizations fall into that trap of thinking, well, we do LinkedIn already and it doesn't work. But the way that you perhaps do LinkedIn is through your organizational company profile, not through the leaders in your organization using and growing their networks to achieve the things that you're trying to achieve as an organization. So we're thinking much more about individual professionals connecting with other professionals to get your job done, not shoehorning everything into a faceless company profile for your organization. I've seen lots of great examples of LinkedIn opening the doors to funding and resources. I had a conversation on Friday with someone about our digital trustees work that started out as a conversation on LinkedIn. Hopefully, some funding to support that work going into 2026, 27. And a lot of the stuff that, I've been around for a long time in this space. Third Sector Lab's been around for 18 years. A lot of the stuff that some of you in the room, if you've been using social media previously, might have done on Twitter or X, but we know that Twitter and X has died a bit of a death in terms of a place to build connections in the third sector and with funders and with influencers in that space. And actually, how does LinkedIn fill some of that vacuum for us as professionals? And then finally, influence and advocacy. And you're probably all following people who do this stuff really well. We're going to look at examples throughout. What I would encourage you to do is go and find someone globally who's doing work like yours. There's perhaps an organization in Canada who's doing similar work to yours. What is the leader of that organization doing? How are they using LinkedIn effectively? How are they positioning both themselves and their organization as the expert voice in that space? Okay, so what LinkedIn is good for, but also what it's not good for. So, really good for deepening specific relationships. One of the things I'd like to think about, and we'll touch on this as we go throughout today, is that a lot of the work that happens on LinkedIn is behind the scenes. So, you put a post up and you have 14 comments on that post about a piece of work that you're thinking about starting to deliver, and you've spoken about it with your board, but you've not quite got to the point where you're trying to find funding. Those 14 comments are 14 potential partners. They are 14 potential sounding boards. They are 14 potential people who might open the doors to that funding. Now, those conversations will likely happen because you reach out to that person, send them a direct message, and take that conversation further. So do not think that doing LinkedIn is simply putting posts up all the time and then somehow something miraculous will happen. We need to close that feedback loop. We need to think those 14 comments potentially can convert into 14 other things happening, or maybe just one thing happening, but that one thing might be enough that that poor post is worthwhile. So closing that feedback loop is really critical. Uh, Signaling institutional credibility. So, most of you in the room are experts in what you do. That's why you exist as a third sector organisation. Lots of you I know have been doing the stuff you do for years. Do not shy away from the fact that you have complete credibility in your space. Do not be apologetic about your work. Now, some of you might do this stuff already. Maybe you have good relationships with journalists. Maybe you are really well known in kind of academic spheres. Maybe you are very good at writing policy papers. Maybe that has not translated to the way that you communicate online. Maybe you've not been able to break that stuff down in its constituent parts. So one of the things I'd like you all to be thinking about is repurposing content is really critical. So you've maybe written a position paper that's gone to government, or you've maybe spent 2 weeks trying to pull together stuff that's going to go to a funder. All of that thinking, those insights becomes really good content for LinkedIn. Now, this is also where working with other leaders and seeing what they're doing is really powerful, but also thinking, right, we are a children's rights charity and we have three really core toolkits on our website. We can feed those toolkits into AI, whether we're using Gemini or Copilot or ChatGPT or Claude, and we can have a conversation with AI and we can say, well, we've got these toolkits. What might this look like as leadership context in the context of where I operate? And how might I create a LinkedIn campaign as an individual leader, talking about some of the core work we've been delivering over the last year and the impact we've had, but also what we hope to deliver in 2026. Now, that's just one example of many, but I'd like to think about you're all probably sitting on content gold dust. How do we repurpose some of that stuff? And how do we use it in a leadership context? And how do we not just open up LinkedIn on a Monday morning and go, Christ, what the hell am I going to actually talk about? You know what you're talking about because it comes up in your team meeting, it came up in your board meeting, you've written a policy paper on it, you've just put in some funding for it. So these are not separate worlds, these worlds coexist. And then the final one, this is often underlooked, is attracting good talent to your organization. Increasingly, people are using LinkedIn as the place to figure out where do they want to work next. There are 3 job adverts live at the moment that align with their skill set. What's the job that they really want? And actually thinking about how you position your organization as a good place to work. And as a leader, you've got responsibility to do that on LinkedIn. What it's not good for, mass broadcasting press releases, whether you call them press releases or not, far, far too much news-based content on LinkedIn. We are doing a thing next Tuesday. We'd love it if you came to the thing. We have just got some money from the lottery. Here is a picture of 4 old people in front of a community garden. Thank you, big lottery fund. That kind of stuff is fine once in a while. If that is all you ever post, you're probably not going to do well in that leadership space in LinkedIn. So trying to move away from just broadcasting updates all the time. Not particularly great for short-term fundraising appeals. That's where your comms team, your marketing team, your fundraising team come into play. If you're a smaller organization, do you have someone who's leading on that stuff? It's not going to replace your newsletter, but you can use newsletter functionality in LinkedIn, and that's particularly good if you want to get regular drip-fed content out to people. We're going to look at LinkedIn newsletters later on. Try not to fall into the trap of thinking like everything needs to be about going viral and often with very generic content. Some of this might be a slow burn. You're going to find your voice. And what I'd love you to do is think about what's the experiment you can take this week. What can you do today? What can you do in the next 30 days? How might you measure success over the next 2 months or 3 months? So taking baby steps of this stuff if it feels very new to you. For those of you who've been using LinkedIn for a while and feel like you're 80% of the way there, what are maybe some of those tweaks that you're going to do that are going to kind of take you to that 90%? Okay, okay. So uh, as I said, we've got a few people that I've kind of sprinkled throughout the slides that I'd encourage you to go and follow. If you're thinking about what does good look like, who are some people that are doing this stuff really well, go and follow some of the people that are in the slides. And remember, you can come back to the slides later on. I popped a link in the chat box. I will pop it back in at the end of the workshop as well. So Michelle Nunn, who's the President and CEO of CARE in the USA, describes social media, which is particularly prevalent on LinkedIn, as this bridge between policy dialogue and philanthropic engagement. So talking about the stuff that we're going to do in that policy space and then actually finding the money to make that stuff happen. And that's one of the things I think for a lot of the organizations in this room, even if you don't work in policy per se, how do you take what you know needs to change in your communities or the areas that you're working in, and how do we actually engage with the people who are going to pay that? Now, that might be individual philanthropists, it might be corporate partnerships, it might be local authorities, it might be government, it might be funders, but professionals from those spaces are increasingly using LinkedIn as the place where they figure out what's happening in that space and they make decisions. Okay, so we're going to talk about this concept of LinkedIn as infrastructure. So I'd like you to be thinking about LinkedIn as a core part of how you do leadership in your organization. And again, just moving away from that concept that suddenly I'm the chief exec, but I also need to become a marketing expert or a comms expert as well. And definitely that is not what's been asked of you. So the first thing, and this is obviously quite an obvious one, is thinking about how do we get our profiles looking as good as they can do. I will be honest, I am not particularly great at this, and I need to kind of revisit it soon. And it's probably an opportunity for me to go and do that. But thinking about your profile not as a CV, and again, not falling into that trap of, oh, well, LinkedIn is just a place where you go and find work. Why would I use LinkedIn? But actually looking at this as a landing page for potential partners. Now, that potential partner might be the person who's going to apply for your head of finance job at your organization. The potential partner might be an organization that's thinking about applying for some joint funding with you. But your landing page, your profile on LinkedIn is that space where they will make some of those decisions. Do you have good LinkedIn recommendations? If you don't, go and ask the person that you worked with in the last month or in the last year where you had a big impact, can you please leave me a LinkedIn recommendation? If you go to your profile and you click on the recommendations part, you can actually just select the people that you want to send a message to. So you don't need to go and craft an email or send them a direct message. You can do it directly from your own profile. Have a really clear headline, like a value proposition, not just a job title. What's the change you want to see? Why should people partner with you? What are you trying to do as an organization? What are you trying to achieve in 2026? Have a really clear about section. Align it with the same why that your organization has. There's an Americanization spelling that is crept into there, sorry. Um, you can add things to your activities. So whether it's you've written an article or you put a post up recently, people want to see that you're present and engaged in the sector. So if I click on your profile and you've not put a post up for the last year, probably suggests to me that you're not particularly engaged. So again, you don't need to put stuff up all the time, but if you put something on as a post in the last month, probably a strong signal that you are engaged. Your banner image, not just decorative, but trying to reflect your mission or positioning. What are three or four big chunky words that describe what you're trying to do, what your organization is trying to do, one of your missions for 2026? How do you get that in your banner image? And then you've got a featured section where you can pin a flagship post. So it could be that you've got a big call to action. Maybe you've got a thing that's going to be debated in the Scottish Parliament next month. Maybe there's a really big report that you've released as an organisation. Maybe you were a guest on a podcast and you want to pin that to the top of your post. Maybe a journalist wrote something about area that you're working on. So something that feels really critical and timely to you, you can pin that to the top of your profile. Okay, okay. So when I was speaking about company profiles or your organizational page, whatever you want to use kind of terminology wise, don't ignore it, but that may be something you delegate to someone else in the organization. The organizational page, when I click on Zoe or Derek's profile, one of the first things I'm going to do is click on the organization where you work. It should be good enough for me to understand what your organization does, what you're trying to achieve, and maybe some of the things that you have done in the last month. Often for an organizational profile on LinkedIn, it's fine that you maybe only post once a fortnight or once a month. Now, this depends on the size of organization. If you're huge and you're British Red Cross, you might be posting every day. If you're a smaller organization and it's simply to get those kind of core organizational updates. So when I click on that person's profile and I see that organization, I can see some of the recent things that they've worked on or the things that are important to that organization. It confirms the legitimacy of you as a leader, but is not the thing that drives that deep engagement on its own. That comes through your profile as an individual leader. The network, so your connections, are those future warm introductions. And that diverse network prevents an echo chamber. What you don't want is that you work in a specific sector and every single connection you have got is just other people who work in that sector. And it is just a bunch of people talking to each other who are all probably trying to find the same funding and probably trying to bring about the same change through the same partners. So, how will you broaden that diverse network? Even if you have a free account on LinkedIn, the search functionality is incredibly powerful. So if I worked in a really small charity in South Lanarkshire and I wanted to connect with every single primary school and high school, I could go and find the deputy heads of all of those schools in a couple of minutes on LinkedIn. If I wanted to find every member of staff who worked in the Robertson Trust, I could do that very quickly. If I wanted to search by keyword, I could do that very quickly. So using that search functionality to grow your network and making that part and parcel of how you do your job. So growing your network is as important as putting those posts up on your profile. And then that kind of wider ecosystem that you're going to kind of start to create. So how are you going to connect with peers and funders and policymakers? One of the big things I would say you should all be thinking is not just thinking, well, I need to just post lots and lots of stuff all the time. If there's a conversation that's doing really well and it's popped up in your feed, and one of your funders is asking for feedback because they're shaping a new funding program, and your organization is an expert in that field, you should be leaving a comment on that or asking a question in that thread. So using other threads that are doing very well in the algorithm as a space for you to interject with your expertise or links out to a toolkit you've got on a website or an article that you wrote recently is a really powerful way of building that network that we've spoken already, but also framing yourselves as an expert without you having to be the one that creates the original content all the time. So thinking about having those conversations in the spaces where other people have created that kind of bit of content already. And that visibility compounds over time, that this will not come overnight. You're not going to come away from this workshop and tomorrow everything is going to be fine on LinkedIn. But if you can spend time on this and set yourself that really simple target, I think, of posting once a week, something meaningful, something that feels real for you, that will compound over time and you'll get that leadership consistency. So building trust is not about those viral spikes. It's about I understand that Alex is an expert in their field. I understand that Dan is an expert in their field. And I'm getting that not because they're telling me, but because of the things that I'm reading, or the questions they're asking, or the things that they are challenging. Okay, okay. So, Darren Walker, who used to be president at Ford Foundation, really interesting person to go and follow. But again, we were thinking about like how do we position ourselves? How do we think about the type of content? He's been really clear over the years in terms of lots of the interviews that he's given that he gets a lot of inbound conversations from potential partners and corporate leaders because of the things that he is talking about. So, I talk a lot about the need for more tech people to serve on charity boards across the UK, talk about why it's beneficial for organisations, but also why it's beneficial for people's careers and leadership within the tech space. That hopefully means that compounding thing over time, when people think about, I'm in a digital data design profession and I want to volunteer and I think I might want to be in a leadership role and I might want to join a charity board, I hope that I will be the person that they come in and reach out to. What I've also seen, which has been really interesting, is increasingly a couple of times in 2026, people have come to me through conversations like last week, someone had a conversation with Google Gemini. They were a tech leader. They wanted to join a board. They didn't know where to start. Through that conversation with Gemini, Gemini recommended they reach out to me, and it was pulling in conversations. It was pulling in, sorry, posts that I had put on LinkedIn, and it was using them as a way of framing, right, if that person wants to find out how they join a board as a tech leader, where are all the signals that someone is trusted in that space and what is the content in that space? And they were pulling content in from LinkedIn to help that person make that decision. So again, this is just part and parcel of why did you bother going on that podcast? Why did you engage with that journalist so you could get something as an article in the Times this month? These are all signals to society and potential partners and potential funders that we are the trusted organisation in that space. Okay, okay. Also, don't underestimate that kind of internal signalling. We had someone on the Open Working programme recently who came in the programme not because they had a big, massive audience, but literally because the 8 people on their board do not read big, giant board papers. Most people don't, unfortunately. And actually, the board was struggling over time as the organisation grew to really understand all the moving parts of the organisation and understand where they could strategically get involved. And so that person was using open working, and particularly through LinkedIn posts, to explain in a drip-fed way over time, in bite-sized chunks, the things that she was working on as a chief exec, the challenges she had, and she was using LinkedIn to connect with her trustees. And she had a conversation with her trustees about how many of them were on LinkedIn and whether they'd use it. And what she found was when it came to those board meetings, her trustees were much more engaged. They understood what she was trying to do. They understood the operational sides of the business. They understood where they could get involved in that. And I'd like you to think about what that looks like, not just for your trustees, but for frontline staff, for managers, for other senior leaders in your organisation, for your funders, for core partners. How do you get people to understand the day-to-day work in a meaningful way and the challenges that you've got without them having to read big, huge papers or attend a 4 hour meeting or to go and look at your intranet? So how do we use this to retain staff? How do we use it as a talent magnet? And how do we use it to, particularly for bigger organisations in the room today, bridge that gap between head office and frontline operations? And even if you're not a huge organisation, how do we bridge the gap between a senior leadership team and a board and the people that are actually delivering the work? Hilary, who's the Director General at National Trust, really nice example of someone who does this stuff really well. I would urge you to go and follow her and go and look at some of the stuff that she's talking about. But she's really good at translating stuff that is meetings with government, meetings with funders, policy positioning, but translating that so that frontline staff can understand it really effectively. Okay, so conscious we're slightly racing through some of this stuff, but what we're going to do, we're going to get a chance for you all to kind of go into pairs, talk a wee bit about your own work as well. Part three, we're going to talk about how we get to thought leadership without the bullshit. This is the bit I would say that puts off a lot of people. So, what you're not trying to do is be a leader you're not. You're not trying to suddenly become someone who would be, the equivalent of someone who sells you a pyramid scheme, but you're the charity leader equivalent of that. I would like you to try and be as authentic to yourself, the way that you talk, the way that you present at a conference. You're just doing that same stuff, but you're doing it on LinkedIn. So don't get too worried about the logistics of this and what it will look like in the day to day. The technical part of it is the easy bit. How LinkedIn works, so the technical bit of which button do I press, which functionality, we'll talk about some of that stuff today. The really critical stuff is like, what is my voice? What am I going to talk about? What am I going to challenge? Who's my audience for this stuff? That's the difficult bit. Okay, so the old definition of thought leadership, or the old icky definition of thought leadership, is someone thinking that they have to position themselves as some kind of guru, someone saying, I have all the answers. I would say for me, the best charity leaders that I follow on LinkedIn are the ones that are asking questions, the ones that are saying, as an organization, we know 70% of this thing, but actually I don't know the rest. Or that, put up quite vulnerable posts. Like I spoke to a young person this week in one of our services, and they told me this thing, and it's completely reshaped my thinking about the work that we're trying to do this year. What do others think about this? So being open, transparent, being vulnerable is really critical. Um, you are an expert in your field, that is why you're there. Or certainly, if you're not the expert and you're the leader, you will have other people who are experts in your field. So I used to be chief exec of quite a big counselling and mediation charity. I wasn't a counsellor and mediator, but I had expert counsellors and mediators who led professional practice in that organisation. And I knew when we came to talk about things about policy or I came to engage with government, I could lean on those experts in our organisation. We had an expert organisation. That's where we got funded to do the work that we're doing. So I want more of you to be thinking about this kind of notion of sharing, reflecting, inviting feedback, inviting conversation. This is not about having all the answers. And even just in crude metric terms, when we're thinking about the algorithm on LinkedIn, if you put a post up that says, here is a thing that I have decided, here is all the answers to that thing, it's not going to do very well in the algorithm because it's very, very unlikely to get comments or questions or feedback or people's own opinions. Those signals to the algorithm, did someone engage with the post through liking it in some way? Did someone leave a comment? Did someone share it? If you can get one of those three signals or all of those three signals, the algorithm is much more likely to deliver that piece of content to more and more timelines across your network. So when we're being vulnerable and we're reflecting and we're inviting feedback, we're doing that because it's a good thing to do as leaders, and that's what leadership should be about. But we're also doing it because that's a much more powerful way to get our content into people's timelines and to hit those key partners that we need to hit across that network on LinkedIn. And also, particularly just when we get into that kind of concept of trying to encourage people to share the content, this is also where we get that snowball effect. So, one of Derek's connections shares something, and Zoe sees it. And Zoe is the person that's going to be the perfect person to partner with that piece of work that Derek is trying to kind of pull together. Zoe is not one of Derek's connections, but Zoe saw that because someone else shared it. So that kind of serendipity stuff that happens when you can build that shareability into content and you can tap into other people's networks, that's where LinkedIn becomes really powerful. So, three kind of core areas for me, what I think useful leadership content does. So, content that clarifies things. So, taking a complex issue in your sector or your field of work and explain it more simply for a broad audience. Explain it for journalists, explain it for politicians, explain it for frontline staff. Challenges, so pushing back on maybe a common assumption or maybe best practice that isn't working. We have someone in the open working program at the moment who is basically doing a lot of work around unpaid carers in their area due to funding cuts in that part of Scotland. A lot of the support they would traditionally have got has been cut back hugely. And she's using LinkedIn as a voice for those unpaid carers and trying to synthesize findings, stuff that she's hearing, challenging local government, helping funders understand what can be done in that space. But that kind of just sitting back and being quite quiet is also a choice in itself. So I'd like you to think about what are the big challenges in your sector right now? What are the funding gaps? What are the bits where you've been let down by local government or by a funder? Are you ready to call that stuff out? If you call it out at the board meeting or you call it out in your senior leadership team, do you call it out in public on a space like LinkedIn? And then one of the other areas I'd like to think about is how we use LinkedIn as a tool to reflect. So share a lesson that you've learned from a recent success or sometimes from a failure. And we'll look at some examples of that throughout the slides today. But maybe just when you're thinking about what you would do after this workshop, what I'd love you to think about is there a complex issue you're working on right now? Could you create a really simple post that explains just part of that? Is there something happening right now that's a big challenge for you as an organization or in your field? How we use LinkedIn to be part of that conversation. Or maybe actually you saw someone being part of that conversation this week and you're going to use LinkedIn to leave a comment on that post. Or how can you reflect on a lesson learned or a failure? So maybe just thinking about in January and February this year, what have been your big successes? What have been some of the failures as an organisation? Maybe you lost funding and it's helped you rethink where you're going to go next as an organisation and what you need to do as a leader. Okay, so Um, one of the things that you can start to do is build a simple, repeatable structure. What we absolutely do not want is we do not want to just open up LinkedIn on a Monday morning, have a blank slate, and then go, oh, Christ, what the hell are we going to talk about? We need that rinse and repeat approach. And through trying different formats and getting some of those role models in place and understanding what good looks like for you, you'll probably get to a point where you might only have two or three or maybe four types of content that work time and time again for you as an individual in terms of the way you write and the things you talk about, but also that work for your audience. So we're not going off on 17 different strands of trying different stuff all the time. We're trying to get to a point where we're really clear on what works for you and what works for your audience. So, um, if you want to try a really simple structure once this workshop ends, these four questions can help. So, what are you seeing? Specific observation from your week. Why does it matter? So, the context and impact on your beneficiaries. What are you learning? So, what's your organization's insight or response? And what's your takeaway? So, what can others take from this? So, you've probably all seen those kind of posts of like, I had this penny drop moment this week. Here's what I think that here's the three big things I think this means for our sector for this year. Um, Also using that kind of week notes format. I'll not go into this too much. We have lots of stuff published at the moment around kind of this concept of working in the open and working transparently. If you Google Open Working Toolkit, or if you go and look at some of the stuff from Giles Turnbull, you'll see some of this stuff around this kind of concept. But most of the people in this room, you probably work to that concept of openness and transparency being important for you as an organization and important for you as a leader. What I would challenge you all to think about is if you have that held as a core principle, what is your mechanism for actually making that happen? And if you don't have that mechanism, could LinkedIn be that mechanism? So we think as an organisation being open and transparent about how we make decisions, about where we're going next, taking our communities on that journey is important. If you think that is important, what is your mechanism for doing it? Now, I'm not telling you LinkedIn needs to be your mechanism, but LinkedIn for a lot of organisations is that mechanism to be open and transparent and to engage those communities of practice, of communities of interest, and those partners. And again, if any of this stuff is unclear, pop your questions in the chat box and we'll pick them up once we get a chance to pause. So, someone I think does this really well, say Dr. Sarah Hughes at Mind. So, system level commentary on those NHS pressures that a lot of you are probably facing at the moment in terms of the work that you do. Talks really candidly about mental health funding gaps, and then leadership reflections on some of the strain that we're seeing in that mental health space across the sector. So again, when we're thinking about what will this look like, you're not needing to guess what this will look like. You can look at other leaders in the space that you're working in or adjacent sectors. How are they talking about this? How can I do it in a way that feels safe? And maybe that'll take some baby steps in terms of being open and transparent and challenging the status quo. I am not suggesting that anyone after this workshop immediately launches into like attacking your funders or any of that kind of stuff. But how do we take baby steps towards creating content that is actually challenging the norms in our space? Okay, so one of the tools that you can use for this is there's kind of I'm not going to go into all the types of things that you can do in terms of how you post on LinkedIn. The core stuff we are talking about is just simply posts. So putting up a post on LinkedIn. It will tend to do best in the algorithm. It will tend to be the thing that is most seen by people. You can also use functionality which is called publications. This is more like traditional blogging on LinkedIn. So you've probably all seen these. It looks like a very normal blog format. It's a wee bit different in terms of you've got more additional formatting. You can add a header image. You have a much longer word count. So there's a word count on a LinkedIn post. There's about, I think, I can't remember how long the word count is in a publication. It's maybe like 4 times as much. So if there's anything where you're wanting to like write really long form content and you need that depth and space, then you can use the publications functionality on LinkedIn to do that. Now, what you can do, and you can turn on really simply, literally just give it a name and you can turn on a switch. Someone can subscribe to your publication. So you're essentially creating a newsletter for your longer form publications on LinkedIn. And that can be really powerful if you want to write about longer form content or you want to reflect on stuff that's happening in your sector, or maybe you're the type of organization that has chunkier outputs, like you write policy things, or you write reports, and that's just part and parcel of what your organization does. You can create long form publication based stuff around that. So, the newsletters and the publications functionality built into LinkedIn can become really powerful if that's one of the things that you want to do, and if you think it's important. Now, the same way you would get an email newsletter, once you publish something in your publication, those subscribers would get an automatic notification. So again, when they log into LinkedIn, they'll see a notification to say that Shan's newsletter has come out this month or Shan has put a new publication up. So really, really simple. If you go into your LinkedIn right now, you can go and have a play about with that and see how that works. Really good for things like monthly reflections, policy analysis, really kind of deep dives into the things that your organization is doing. This is also the kind of stuff where you might want to lean on a policy person or a comms person, or a research person in your organization, that they can help you shape some of that stuff, but you can give a kind of leadership slant on it. This stuff also does really well in terms of search. So in terms of SEO, but increasingly search on AI as well, that kind of longer form content on LinkedIn. Okay, so when we're thinking about kind of types of posts, I'm going to draw on kind of three big examples that I think work really well for leaders. Now, the first one, this is what I would categorize as a CAM post, so kind of longer form content that actually is about, in this case from Charmaine, is about I guess a personal reflection. I'll not get into detail because you can read it about her dad having heart valve surgery, so he works for British Heart Foundation. But a human story that is not a marketing pitch. It is not a news update. It's being pride in the organisation without self-promoting. She's been reflective but not performative. What I think is really critical in a lot of these kind of good posts from leaders on LinkedIn is about centering the mission that you've got as an organisation and being able to talk about your team. You're not just constantly talking about you as an individual. So again, when we're thinking about getting over that kind of cringe factor, we're bringing in the impact that your organization is having and your broader team is having, and using LinkedIn as a way to celebrate those individuals who maybe don't get celebrated that much. And also then ending with practical value. So whether it's a link out to more content or it's a question, but these types of posts build trust and they feel grounded and they feel real. And we've got some more examples of ones like this already. And again, just remember you don't need to read this whole stuff. The link for the slides will be at the end, and I put it in at the start as well. But again, when you're thinking about who does this well, go and follow Charmaine Griffiths and go and look at some of the stuff that she's been posting. An invitational post. So Matt is very good at this kind of stuff. So raising a leadership tension, using a real world example, challenging behavior, but being respectful when you're doing that. But more importantly, trying to spark discussion, not just informing people, not just saying, I have decided something, but I don't know the answer to this. Or I think this, what do other people think? I think this, but am I wide of the mark? As we've said already, these are the types of posts that will build engagement and build reach in the algorithm because naturally they elicit feedback, they elicit comments, they are the types of things that people will share. So, what are the questions that you might ask this week? What are the types of things you're wrangling with as a leader or as an organization? Could you post one bit of content like this week? And then getting into kind of more specific posts, so explaining the thinking behind some of your leadership behavior, maybe reflecting on something that you've done in the last month. So in this example from Shabna Begum, who's the chief executive of Runnymede Trust, reflecting on being a panelist on a television show, and some of the not so good bits of that, and reflecting on what they might do differently. But often it's taking work that you're doing already. Now, in this case, it's quite front facing because it was on the TV, but it might be that you had a meeting with a funder, it might be that you presented at a conference, it might be you had a staff away day. So, how do you take some of the stuff that might feel like invisible work and make it front and center, make it more visible for that kind of broader audience? How do you move beyond the slogans and taglines that your organization has? But for me, this is about building that kind of compounding long-term credibility that we spoke about. So we're showing depth, not just opinion. So again, sometimes that might be writing slightly longer form stuff. Sometimes it might be train of thought stuff that is not the most polished. I would urge you to try and get content out the door in no more than half an hour. If you take more than half an hour to write a post, you're taking far, far too long to write it. It is better to get something out with a spelling error and you notice the spelling error the next day because you can go back and edit the post. It is much better to ship stuff and get good at that and get into the rhythm of it than spending hours and hours going back and tinkering things because it might be 5% better, but you spent 800% more time trying to get it out the door. So getting into that sense of urgency will give you a nice rhythm to work with. Okay, so things to avoid. Now, you can write whatever the hell you want. Whatever you do after this workshop is none of my business. So if you want to ignore this advice, that is totally up to you. You might want to do these things that I've told you to avoid. I think generally in the third sector, people are good at sniffing bullshitters out at a million miles. So kind of hot takes for the sake of it. So someone writing something that they probably don't actually believe, but they want to create a bit of a stir, create a bit of controversy, just so that they can get lots of comments and game the algorithm. That will damage the long-term trust that you have with partners. Now, that doesn't mean you shy away from the difficult stuff, but what it means is simply jumping on things and having controversial takes for the sake of it is fairly pointless when we're thinking about that long-term engagement. That does not mean you shouldn't call out things that are happening in the field of work that you're in, or injustices, or the things that are important to your organization right now. Avoid sector jargon, acronyms, internal language. Even if you know that every other social worker knows this thing, try and spell out an acronym. Try and make it accessible for a broad range of people. Because you might have in your head that this is for social work professionals that I've written this post for. But actually, what might happen is this lands on the feed of a policymaker. And if they can't understand it, you've missed that opportunity to engage with them. So always thinking about how do I write stuff in plain English, how do I speak to that intelligent outsider from our sector? And virtue signaling, like show the work, don't just state the values. So show, don't tell applies to everything that you're trying to do. Like again, this is my own personal ick, is like virtue signaling stuff within the charity sector. Is I think as leaders, we also need to remember our place. Is often you're working in spaces where we're working with some of the most marginalized communities. We are working, if you're working in the care sector, you're working with frontline staff who do some of the hardest jobs and they are not paid a lot of money. And I think you need to be really careful in terms of what can fall into that kind of virtue signaling bucket. Again, if anyone's not sure about this, about like what you might avoid, but equally might what you might talk about, we'll pick that up in the group discussion, but also pop it in the chat box, and we can kind of pick up any of that stuff as well. Yeah, and that probably leads nicely onto this. I mean, that's an example from Michelle, who profiled earlier on. How do we do more ethical storytelling? How do we tell stories with people, not about them? Now, you might be the voice for some of those stories as that leader and as the person with that network, but how do you put those people front and center? How do you put their voices front and center? What might that look like? So, what you'll probably have noticed is the types of content that does well on LinkedIn, the type of content, sorry, that does well on LinkedIn is human content. Now, that may be you as an individual leader, it might be a member of staff, it might be a volunteer that you're profiling, it might be one of your members that you're profiling, it might be an organization you funded, it might be, in this case, from Michelle, some of the partners at CARE in Ghana. But those pictures of real world humans and those human stories are the things that will outperform everything else time and time again. So I'd like you to just think about that. That's one of the biggest things of getting out with your comfort zone is like that picture of me or that picture of me with one of our members of staff, that profile of a board member that I want to celebrate, or that young person where we've got permission to use their image. But how do we put humans and human stories front and center in this content? Okay, so what we're going to do, this is mainly to save my voice. I'm going to put you in pairs. It's going to be fairly randomized. Some of you might be in threes. I'm going to stop the share in a wee second. And we're going to do this very quick task. We'll probably only take about like 5 or 10 minutes to do this. It's just a chat in your pair. But I'd like to think about what is one issue your organisation is currently wrestling with. So it could be a big policy shift, could be a funding challenge, could be a trend that you're noticing, could be a big thing that's coming up with your board. So one thing that your organisation is currently wrestling with. And then I'd like to think about what is a way that you could talk about that publicly that would be meaningful. So not just like, I'm going to post a thing for the sake of it. How will you posting this thing help something? How will it shape that policy narrative? How might it help funders understand where your organisation is at right now? How might it help you be seen as an expert in your field? And what I'd like to think about is what would that look like? So would it be a post where you're stating the facts about something? Would it be about providing a really concrete, real world human example? Would it be about inviting a debate and asking a genuine question to your peers? So just looking at some examples that we've looked at already. So what's the thing you want to talk about and what might be the format in which you do it? There's no right and wrong. We're going to put you in pairs and it's just a chat for the next 5 to 10-ish minutes. So I'm going to stop sharing just now. I'll pop you in breakout rooms. I will also pop the slides link back in for those of you who joined a wee bit later. I'll do that as well. Cool. There we go. Right, that's the slides link back in the chat box. So, one of the things I would say is like there's a few things popped in about like for a small chat, one of the I'm going to pronounce this badly, Isle of Lewing Trust. For a small charity, most of our local supporters are not using LinkedIn, but funders and partners are. What I can't be clear enough about this. I am not telling everyone in this room that LinkedIn is going to solve all your problems because it definitely won't. I'm also not telling you that LinkedIn is going to be the only social channel you should be using. So what I'd urge you to do, and if you go and look at the training on the Third Sector Lab website, you'll see that we've run previously a social media strategy workshop, which will talk about how do we really understand how we align audiences, content, and channels. That LinkedIn is part of that broader mix. It's the mix of how much time do we spend on our website? How much time do we spend on an email newsletter? How much time do I spend speaking at conferences? How much time do I spend in meetings? So I'd like to think about LinkedIn as just part of that broader mix of how you communicate and get your job done. As a leader, you need to figure out how much time do I need to spend on this based on what is the value I'm getting out of it. So if you try LinkedIn and you think I'm going to use this to build more corporate partnerships, but you do it for 3 months and you don't get a single conversation with a corporate partner, either it's not the space for you or you're doing something quite wrong. So you need to have build in that chance to reflect on what you're doing. And again, this is why I'm talking about you need to find your own voice, but you need to figure out what you're actually trying to achieve and be quite brutal about that. So not like I'm trying to achieve 8 different things. Maybe you're only trying to achieve one thing. Maybe you're trying to achieve 2 or 3 things. I would say no more than three. What are you actually trying to do as a leader? So are we trying to position ourselves as an expert organisation in a certain policy field over the next year? Have we had a massive shift in our strategy? And that strategy has just been launched this week, and I really need to get behind this as a leader. And there's one core element of that that I think LinkedIn is going to help us achieve. So this is not going to do everything, and it's not for all your audiences, and it might only be a tiny fraction of your week. So I'm going to put you in your breakout rooms. I said, pick one thing that your organization is struggling with or wrangling with, or one big thing that's important to you right now, and then think about what might you say on LinkedIn that's aligned to that. But the big thing that I would urge you all to think about is like, why are you doing this stuff? So do you want to position yourselves as experts? Do you want to reach out to local authority decision makers? Do you want to get more teachers to use your toolkit and resources in the classroom? What's the thing you're actually trying to do? So breakout rooms, 7 minutes, we'll say, something like that. Don't panic too much. And you'll be in a room with probably two or three. It will depend on the number of rooms. Right. Unlucky for some, there's going to be 13 rooms. I'll put you in the rooms just now and then I'll give you a warning before we finish up. Okay, okay, right, welcome back. Anyone want to, if you want to stick your hand up, anyone want to share either a good idea that came from one of the people you spoke to, or a good idea that you've had yourself, or anything where you've got maybe a bit of a kind of challenge that you want to speak about as well. So, any takers, if you want to just stick your hand up using the wee icon on Zoom, and then we can pick someone to share. Just to say as well, when out your back, if everyone could just make sure they're on mute, that'd be useful. Well, unless you're going to speak, that'd be good. Donna, thank you.
Hiya. So first up, Fess, we were all still too busy introducing ourselves and chatting about what we all did that we didn't really get round to the task at hand. We were just getting started on that when we realised we were running out of time. However, I suppose I wanted to kind of highlight I'm a bit rubbish on LinkedIn and I'm kind of keen to kind of use it more effectively. But the big thing for us is that social care, as many folk on the webinar will know, is really under threat and heavily underfunded at the moment. And for us in particular, our focus is on prevention and giving people early skills to stop them getting into crisis. And a lot of local authorities and that is what's getting cut because it's all about supporting people in crisis. That's all the money's for. But of course, if you don't stop the issue, then you end up with more at the other end. So for me, I think I really want to kind of brave up and absolutely use LinkedIn to highlight what prevention achieves, and the cost. So I've been doing a lot of work on cost benefit analysis type work and case studies, and I think I need to get braver at sharing that in a correct way, but spending the time, first of all, making sure that I'm linked with the right people. Because there's no point, as you said, just sharing that with people already in social work or whatever they know. So I think I need to really make sure, particularly with the new election happening and a whole raft of new politicians going to be joining the party, I think I need to be making connections with all that's happening and making sure that they are hearing about the good work that we do, getting that point across.
Thanks, Donna. That's really good. Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think like Donna's example is a really good example where we're not seeing the work that we do in the day to day as operating in a vacuum and as a different thing from the thing that we're doing on LinkedIn. Susan, we've probably got time for one more and then we'll kind of move back in the slides.
Yeah, I just really wanted to say that was so interesting because we had the exact same conversation in our group, and that's exactly what I was saying. I needed to be posting about on LinkedIn and asking the question, who else is experiencing this? So it seems like, yeah, there'd be a lot to talk about around that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this probably leads on quite nicely actually to what we're going to talk about now is this notion of open working as a leadership asset. So, as said before, go and Google open working. There's lots of stuff that we've written at Third Sector Lab over the years. Can everyone see the slides as well? I'm just going to double check. Yeah. But yeah, this kind of ties in nicely to those kind of two bits of feedback that we've just had. So, what does this look like? I think this is one of my favourite posts that I've seen recently from Leona's chief exec at Aberdeen Foyer, a post talking about Hoovers. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but it's been getting lots of interest. There's like loads, it's had loads of comments and shares recently, but this notion of showing the process, not just the polished result, and I think that's really critical as leaders. It builds trust, it invites collaboration, it demonstrates transparency. It's that notion that you and your organization are a learning entity that shapes based on culture and society and the people that you're supporting. We're not just, we have decided a thing and we deliver some programs and here are the programs. Please come along to the programs. It's like, how do we have these open conversations that shape the very work that we do and the thinking that we do? And that LinkedIn can become a really powerful place to do that. So if you don't follow Leona already, go and give her a follow. Some safe examples of open working. So, the question we're currently debating X internally, how do others handle this? Ties into some of the stuff that you've spoken about. Maybe there's a report that's come out from Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and you want to give your big three reflections on how that work is going to affect the work that you're doing in the Children and Families space. Maybe you want to credit your team, so you maybe want to highlight specific work of a frontline manager who never gets profiled and actually you want to profile that person and talk about the work that they're doing. Could be that you just come out of a meeting. So maybe like one of the things that I'll do a lot of the time, either before I'm about to go in to like a workshop that I'm delivering or speaking at a conference, or immediately afterwards, I'll use LinkedIn to basically reflect on the things, but also sometimes I'll use it as a way of preparing for it. So I'll put a post up maybe like say a week before I'm preparing for this workshop on X, Y, and Z. Here's my thinking. Here's 5 things that you need to think about when it comes to this. And then I'll get feedback that will then help shape what the finished product is. So again, just thinking about how do you build this into your actual real working week. Thinking a wee bit about governance and boundaries. Again, I'm not going into this like with a very kind of happy clappy approach, saying that everything is going to be wonderful all the time. You will need to think about things like, depending on what the governing body is for the work that you do, what the advice is from your membership body. Maybe you have legal constraints about what you are or aren't allowed to say in your work. Maybe if you're talking about fundraising, we know that kind of fundraising governance in England and Wales is different in Scotland. So there will be some of these things that, whether it's those kind of legal boundaries or whether it's boundaries that your board has set you, you will need to consider some of that stuff. And again, this is where having a good social media policy is useful, but also just having a sense check of, you as a chief exec maybe coming to your board and saying, this is how I'm starting to think about using LinkedIn. I've run these experiments. What does this look like? How do we do this safely? How can we push the boundaries? What are we comfortable talking about? What are we not talking about? Um, I'm not going to get into this too much because like don't feed the trolls is the main bit of advice, but knowing the difference between a troll and a critic is quite unusual to get. You don't get trolling LinkedIn the same way you might in a platform like X, but people will not agree with you all the time, and that is okay. That is part of opening up a dialogue and a conversation. That is not the same as someone being offensive. Ignore them, block them. Very simple to do on LinkedIn. They are not the same thing. A troll is not the same as a valid critic. Um, Craig is another person that I would go and urge you to go and look at. So Craig Bennett is Chief Exec at the Wildlife Trust. So he's been using it a long time to support policy influence, stakeholder alignment, particularly around that kind of reputational capital around public campaigns. Very good at pulling in people who work at the kind of independent wildlife trusts across the UK, pulling in other independent campaigners who are interested in the work that they're doing. So he's not just going, we have an organisation that is the Wildlife Trust, and I talk in that kind of closed walled garden, but who are all the different people who should be part of these conversations? And sometimes that might be as simple as he will tag the right people in a post so that they get a notification to know that here is a thing that I'm writing this week. I would love your feedback and your inputs in it. Tagging people in posts is really critical, whether it's in the post itself, making sure that you tag them, just using the little @ symbol and you can start writing their name, or tagging them in the image. You can tag up to 30 people in an image, but that means those people will get a notification that they've been tagged. Okie dokie. So, lots of the relationships happen off post, which we've spoken about already. So, um, this is a kind of broad brush hierarchy of interaction on LinkedIn. So we've spoken a lot about kind of posting, very highly visible, um, that kind of one too many relationships you're having through that approach. Commenting on things, so commenting on something that someone else has already written, or commenting as a feedback because someone's asked you a question on your own post. Slightly more conversational. Direct messaging is where a lot of the transactional things will happen. So that meeting that you get with a local authority decision maker, the question that a partner wants to ask you, the bit of feedback you get from another leader in your space. So that direct message on LinkedIn becomes a really powerful way to again kind of close that feedback loop. But also when we're thinking about, I've put up a really good post and it's about a change that we're thinking about making as an organization. I've got 15 comments. What is the potential for you to open up a dialogue with those 5 of those 15 people? What might happen if you open up a dialogue with 5 of those 15 people? This is what I spoke about when I was talking about tagging. So you'll notice this when you come an image, you can tag people in the post. Really crude terms, what this means is when you tag someone in a post, particularly in an image, they'll get a notification on LinkedIn to say they've been tagged. Ergo, when they log in, yours is the first bit of content they will see. Use it sparingly. Do not tag the same 30 people. But you can do things like, rather than just tagging your funder, you could go onto your funder's profile page and you could say, you could type in the name of the funder and click on the people tab, and it will show you all the people that work for Robertson Trust, all the people who work for RS McDonald, all the people who work for Esme Fairbairn Foundation. And then you can go and tag the appropriate staff who you want to see your organisational piece of content or your professional piece of content. So use it sparingly, but also the important thing is you can tag people who are not on your existing network. So if you wanted to tag 3 journalists who you know write a lot about community development work in rural areas across Scotland, you could tag those journalists. They don't need to be a connection to be tagged and for them to get that notification. So it's a really simple bit of functionality, but a really powerful bit. And I always think this is quite an important concept to think about, that if LinkedIn is working properly for you, a lot of the value will be invisible to everyone else. So the posts are a kind of means to an end, the bit where you convert that new corporate partner or that really critical conversation. A lot of that stuff will happen because someone reaches out an email, or you meet someone at an event who saw your post for the last month, or someone sends you a direct message. So a lot of that stuff is behind the scenes, and that is okay. Okay, so part 6, deliberate use, not constant use. Again, we talked about that rhythm. Don't think you need to post every day. You absolutely do not need to post every single day. That's a very busy slide, isn't it? Since I put that example from Craig in there. But yeah, so what we're thinking about is relevance beats recency. So you don't need to post daily. The system prioritizes how relevant content is over how new it is. And again, this is we're thinking we're not just creating stuff for the algorithm in LinkedIn, we're creating stuff as signals. Will we be found in a Google search? Increasingly, when people are asking questions of AI, are we going to be found in those conversations as well? So that depth of content and the stuff being relevant and significant is much more critical than stuff feeling like, oh God, I need to get this thing out today and I need to do something every day and it needs to be super timely. And again, when we're thinking about a good example of that is like kind of a lot of the stuff Craig's done around like house building within the UK, and kind of challenging some of the stuff that's been in the media around that. Right, carousel posts. I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but you've probably seen these before, these kind of nice, beautiful, structured posts where you can kind of almost like scroll through 6 or 7 things. Quite a nice way of explaining complex issues. Quite a nice way if you're thinking about involving a comms team or a marketing person or someone who creates content. If you use tools like Canva, Canva has a carousels post template, so it will do it all for you. You can put your corporate colors in. It's quite a nice way of like 8 things you need to think about X, or you want to take your organization's business plan or strategy and you want to break it down into smaller chunks. Those carousel posts that you've seen on LinkedIn are a really nice way of doing it. You can also upload full PDFs. So lots of, I mean, I'm working with an organization at the moment with some like 250 PDFs on their website. They have no shortage of content. So again, just thinking about how might we repurpose stuff? How might we use that carousel post functionality that we've got built in? This is not going to be for everyone. What I would say is the main thing I want you all to be thinking about focusing on is posts on the main feed. But if you want to play about with some of that extra functionality, and you want to use carousel posts, these are some of the ways that you can do it. We've covered a lot of the kind of algorithm changes, but again, just thinking about what is rewarded. So knowledge-based content, so stuff that has meaningful comments underneath it, not just that is nice, congratulations, Colin, but actually, you know, you've started a real interesting debate and there's been depth of comments and conversations underneath it. When that type of thing happens, what you'll see is that's the content that goes to a lot of timelines very, very quickly. And be comfortable that stuff feels niche. Don't worry if your thing feels super niche. If it's like geographically niche or thematically niche, that is much better than trying to please lots and lots of different audiences with your content. It will do much better in the algorithm. Okay, so sustainable routine, 15 minutes, dead simple. 2 minutes, scan those notifications for high value interactions. So has one of your funders, the chief exec of one of your big funders, put something up that you're going to interact with? Has a journalist put a question up saying, I really want to speak about people, speak to people who work on community land management in Wales. Who should I speak to? You're the person they should speak to. So think about also if your comms or marketing person uses things like social media listening tools, maybe they can do some of that work for you. They can highlight some of the conversations you should be getting involved in. Take a couple of minutes, leave 2 thoughtful comments on partners' posts, send a connection request. So again, just thinking about how you build that deliberate stuff in. So go and connect with your key partners, key funders, any of those people you want as your audience. The beauty of LinkedIn is you can use the people search and you can go and find them and you can send them connection requests. You can't really do that on any other platform. And then post. So share one observational post once a week, twice a week if you're feeling you've got the stuff to say, but once a week is plenty for most of the people in this room. One high quality bit of content that's relevant to your audience is much more powerful than posting throwaway content every single day. Okay, and we've spoken a wee bit about this stuff already. Again, it's thinking about finding your own voice. Who are you as a leader? What approach do you want to take? You don't all need to be the same. So the type of stuff that Antonia posts is going to be different from Susan, is going to be Nicola, it's going to be different from Nicola. Be comfortable with that. There's different approaches to leadership on LinkedIn. Video. I've left this kind of to the end because lots of people, I'm not comfortable with video, right? There's no getting away from it. I do not like plonking a camera in front of myself and saying the same thing that I would type out. Video content does very well on LinkedIn. If you're comfortable with video or you want to start, I would encourage, I need to experiment a wee bit more with it this year, but it will do very well in the algorithm. You've probably seen that a lot as more and more video content in 2025 and 2026. And we're talking about 60, 90-second reflections, short form content, filmed on your phone. If you're good enough, get a wee tripod or stick it on something where you can get a steady hand. Don't do the wobbly hand thing and try and film it in selfie mode. It doesn't need to be massively edited or creative content. So use the video functionality that's built into the LinkedIn app that's on your phone. Do very rough and ready stuff, but a really easy way of thinking about it is like a lot of the stuff that you might have done in a written post, what might be a 90-second or a 60-second video equivalent of that same piece of content. Someone that I think does it really well, Habina Gurma, who's a disability activist, and yeah, her video content is really good. So when you're thinking about kind of like personal human stories, but actually that is not hugely edited and is often rough and ready, is often out and about. Really nice way of doing things. Also a nice way of like video content can create like a connection with the work that you do. So if you're on like, the Isle of Lewing or you run a community centre or all the stuff that you do that's quite visual, how does video content from you as a leader bring that stuff to life? Okay, so final slide. If this is working, some of the stuff that you're going to notice is funders quoting your thinking back to you before you're even presenting to them. We're building these deep relationships with people over time. You're going to have much more high caliber candidates or people who certainly understand your work and the depth of your work more effectively. More people reaching out to you, so you're not having to be the one that reaches out to potential partners all the time. But actually, as you create more of this content, what you're going to see naturally over time is people reaching out to you and asking if they can partner with you on work. And that time saver, what you're doing is fewer cold introductions. You're not sending an email out the blue. You're not constantly asking for someone to introduce you to another person. You will have a warmer connection to a much broader range of potential partners because you're doing that through the content, the conversations that you have on LinkedIn every single week. Right, I'm going to finish there. I don't know why I've done the last slide with a big picture of my face. That's a bit weird. If you're interested in our work, you can go over on the Third Sector Lab website. You can all connect with me on LinkedIn. If you type my name into LinkedIn, you'll find it. That link on the last slide will take you to it as well. I'm going to stop sharing, and we've got a wee bit of time for questions. So I'm going to jump into chat because there's a few in there, and then we'll pick some up, and I'll stay on a wee bit beyond. How do you get subscribers to your publications? So when you first set it up, basically people will get a notification to say that you've set up a new publication or newsletter. You can regularly, there's a way you can just like, I think you can select up to like 40 people at a time where you can basically ask them to subscribe to it. So it's quite a good way of, if you're wanting to get regular readers to content, it's quite a nice way of doing it. I think it works quite well because it's kind of like a way of framing it as almost like the leader of the organization's newsletter without having to create yet another email newsletter to do it. So treating it in that space, like the chief exec update or the head of finance update, or whatever's important to you. Alex makes a good point about banner images. The words in those aren't accessible for people using screen readers. So that is a good point. What I would say is like if there's anything that's critical in a banner image, make sure you're repeating it in the alt text of that image, and also you might want to repeat the same text in your bio on LinkedIn is a really good point. This is also why I was saying like 3 or 4 words is plenty. Um, don't cram lots of. I still see this happening. Lots of text crammed in images on LinkedIn. It's bad. It's bad from an accessibility point of view, but also it just doesn't look very nice, and people will not engage with it. Right, and just see if there's any other questions. How important is it to get the verification badge on LinkedIn? That has been on my to-do list for a while. I don't know how much of a signal it sends. I think over time it might become more important because you know the person is the real person that they're saying. I think in a sector where lots of people know each other already and there's a bit of trust, that's probably less important. I would say get it because it's very simple. I mean, you can like take a photograph of your passport or your driving license and you can get a little verification badge. It's pretty simple to do. Is not responding to cold sales DMs an issue? Shan's asking. No, ignore them completely. Like you'll know the difference. You'll all know the difference between like someone who's just blatantly trying to sell you shit versus this is an actual interesting conversation that I might open up. You don't have an obligation to respond to people. The same thing goes the other way. So you might reach out to someone, they don't have an obligation to respond to you. And this is where sometimes send check the thing I'm about to send, if this feels like a sales message, then I need to rewrite it. Because anything that feels like a sales message will fall on deaf ears. Like, what is the thing you're trying to do? Do you just want a call with someone? Do you want to get a coffee? Like, what's the ask you're making of them? And that's a lot of the things, like, some people send me things and I'm like, what do you actually want from me? Like, just be quite upfront about the thing that you want. Yeah, there's good points Sam makes, right? So putting a link in the post harms the algorithm. It's very annoying. So generally, a good way of doing this is directing people to things like saying, you will find this on our website under the such and such tab. A simple way of doing it is the first comment that you leave under the post, you can put the link to the thing on your website or the resource or the event. Also, we didn't touch on this too much because it's the kind of thing that I would say you should be delegating as leaders, but using LinkedIn events is really powerful. So if you have like events and training or anything that is an event for your organization, you can use LinkedIn events. Now, the beauty of that is you can invite connections to it. So you can still put the link to your Eventbrite or the events page on your website, but you're tapping into a whole other audience of people. And you can send, I think you can send up to about 30 or 40 like event requests at a time on the events functionality. I would say as leaders, you have limited time and probably don't do that yourselves. Is thinking about like, is there someone else in the organization who could do that? Zoe, you're asking a question around cybersecurity. What was the specific question? Do you want unmuting? Come on.
It's about the what's it called? You know, where they ask you to identify yourself on LinkedIn
Mm,
verification. So one of the reasons that I have not done it is concern around cybersecurity and the fact that you've then got LinkedIn having your face, having all the information about your date of birth, having
totally.
basically enough information to create a fake passport of you. And then what if that gets into the wrong people's hands? That's my concern. It's why I haven't done it.
Yeah,
And I
I
feel like
don't
I've had reasonable success on LinkedIn without
without.
doing. I don't know if I'm being overly like concerned about these things, but I just think
Yeah, they use a
I
third party verification tool, but I would say like the
do
same.
they.
Yeah, they do, but I would say with all of these things, it's like how much do you want to trust big tech with any of your personal information? This is
Yeah,
like it's a good where like I am not a happy clappy advocate of like so LinkedIn is arguably not as bad as like X or Meta.
yeah,
Still concerns about any company that operates at the multi-billion dollar scale. Like the ethics of a lot of it will always be questionable, I suppose is a nice way of putting it. So I would always be taking, but the same way that you should be thinking about like what are the ethics around how we use AI, which platforms are we using, that we should be having broader tech ethics questions in the chat.
yeah.
That's a whole other workshop. But yeah, if you're not comfortable, don't do it. I mean, I've not seen any issues.
I
I've not,
mean, maybe I'm just being like, yeah, I might, it might be totally fine. It might really improve people. Does it mean more people see your posts? Does it make a massive, because I find that generally the people that respond to the posts I put out are actually not just random connections, but they're connections who I've actually met in real life.
yeah,
And therefore I've already got a relationship with. And then getting a post out is just putting my topic to the front of their mind. But I quite often know them already.
Yeah.
and therefore I don't feel I necessarily need it. But I don't know, I might be missing great opportunities and just being a bit paranoid.
Yeah, I think only you can answer that. But yeah, I've not seen I've not done the verification yet, and I've not seen any big issues in not doing it. Any other final questions before we finish up? Okay, I'll pop my LinkedIn in the chat box again, just a final time. If anyone's got anything post workshop where you're like, oh, should I meant to ask that? Just ping me a message on LinkedIn. It's totally fine. I'm more than happy answering stuff. So that's in the chat box on Zoom just now. We will have more workshops coming up in 2026. We're working on our program for the next couple of months. So if you go on the Third Sector Lab website, click on the training tab, you can also sign up for updates in there, so you'll get updates on all the other free workshops that we've got coming up. Yeah, thank you so much for coming along. Do keep your eyes peeled on LinkedIn. I'm working on a kind of guide that obviously you've got the slide deck, but I'm working on a kind of written guide that will pull together a lot of this stuff in a wee bit more depth. So that will come out at some point. I don't know when, maybe in the next couple of weeks. That will come out on LinkedIn as well. Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, and I'll see you all soon.